Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm here to not talk about the Hosting Manifesto, but to speak about together and togetherness. And in particular, I'm here because I believe that we, as the people in this room, we all probably share a belief that we as a society are facing incredibly complex challenges that we cannot solve as one person or one organization alone. We'll have to work together. We'll have to work in community. We'll have to use mass collaboration. And the question that keeps me up at night is, how does together actually work? How do we do together? And I've been building communities for the last 15 years. And today I just want to share a couple of things from my journey, because you're going to go on and hopefully create the eShop goals and work on the eShop goals together. My journey with community starts with a pack of salad. I'm a hungry guy for the people who know me. And a few years ago, I go around, I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I went to a grocery store to pick up a pack of salad. And as I look at the salad, look at the ingredients list, my pack of salad is inviting me to join its community. And Andy mentioned before how community has become such a word. We hear it all the time. It's such a buzzword. It really means everything and nothing these days. It's like the word digital or social. And if we work with community, if we want to create community, we have to define what we mean by it. We have to look beyond it. And I've worked with lots of different communities, and this is how I look at a community. A community is very simple. A community is a group of people, not a pack of salad, that trust each other and that feels they belong together. So you see there's two core ingredients in there. One is trust and the other is belonging. Now let's look at those two visually. Trust is the relationship we have among each other, right? There's a group of people, some of us have trust. Belonging is that sense of a whole, is that sense of togetherness, is a sense of shared identity. We're all in this together. And it's at the intersection of those two, when trust and belonging comes together, where I think we really unlock the opportunity of communities. And we find trust in quite a lot of places. We find sometimes belonging, but we don't find them together that often. And actually we live in a world where our traditional places of belonging are falling away. Traditionally, we found belonging in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our villages. But where do we find belonging now? Well, these days, we find belonging in the communities we create, the communities we choose. And I think that's the opportunity for all of us. Let's look a little bit more at trust. Last week, I got to meet this very inspiring leader at the Brooklyn Community Foundation that actually gives out grants with the help of the community. And as she was describing her work, she said, you know, in our work, everything moves at the speed of trust. And I think that so much goes to the core of it, what trust is. Andy mentioned it before, trust is an enabler. Trust is something that speeds things up. And as you're going to be collaborating, you will face moments where you have a choice. And that choice will be, do you go the traditional way, maybe the written down way, the structured way, or do you take a risk? Do you walk into uncertainty? And depending on how much trust there is, the faster things will come, the easier things will become, and the more opportunities open up. Trust matters tremendously in an ecosystem and in a community, and it matters so much when it is combined with belonging. This reminds me of a story of my friend Kira, who I found in a global community called Sandbox, which brings young entrepreneurs together all over the world. And I've realized that people use communities and ecosystem a lot to search things. There's usually people who have things, and there's people who are looking for things. And one of the biggest jobs of the community is to make that match. So Kira is looking to connect with Somali pirates. And Kira, as a young woman living in London at that time, her chances of knowing a Somali pirate are pretty small, right? In her direct network, the people she knows, the people she trusts, I don't know. Like, I don't think the chances are very high that she would know some Somali pirates. But what she was able to do is she was part of this Sandbox ecosystem, and she was able to tap into the whole group. And she was able to go and search, not just in her direct network, but across the whole community. And what we need there, if you can quickly show it back, is that if this is Kira here, her direct network, there might not be a Somali pirate. But it turns out that someone in our ecosystem does a lot of work in Africa, knows someone who works in Mogadishu, and was able to connect her to a Somali pirate. Now the question is, that person has never met Kira. Is that person willing to open up their resources and make a very uncomfortable introduction with a lot of risk? What is happening here is that when belonging and trust comes together, we create something that I call proxy trust, where you start trusting not just the direct people you know, but you start trusting the group as a whole. And yes, proxy trust will never be as strong as the people you know directly, but it will open up tremendous resources, and it will enable something that I call the human search engine. The human search engine effect, where we search across communities. And that's the opportunity. That's why when we bring trust and belonging together, we create amazing value in a community. So the question that I ask myself a lot as a community builder is, well, how can we design for trust and belonging? How can we optimize for those two values? And I've looked at that a lot over the last 3 years. I've looked at over 120 communities, and the long answer, the not fire starter answer, is came out in something we call the community canvas. We mapped out 120 communities, and we looked at what do they have in common, how can we build strong communities, and we identified 17 themes. It's an open source guidebook. You can all look it up online on communitycanvas.org. But for today, I want to focus on one single thing. And that thing is that I want to ask us, how do we show up in a community? And really, in a community, there's two ways to show up. One is as a consumer, the other one is as a co-creator. Now, many of us are so used to show up as a consumer. Why? Because we live in a highly commercialized world. Everyone is constantly selling things to us. And as a group, that difference could not matter more. A consumer is someone who shows up and expects to be served, is someone who has a little bit of a sense of entitlement, who, if something doesn't quite go that well, they will walk away from it. A co-creator, on the other hand, is someone who feels like this is not their group, this is our group, who will feel like that if nothing happens, I have to change something. Now, conflict is very normal in groups, but consumers will walk away from the conflict, while co-creators will help to solve the conflict. And very importantly is, how do we help each other? As a consumer, we help each other out of reciprocity. I will help someone if I can expect something to get in return. But as a co-creator, we hopefully will help someone out of generosity. And the question, of course, is, like, how do we do this shift? How do we go from this very transactional mindset to a much more relational mindset? And I want to share a couple ideas that I have along the way that could help us shift from consumer to co-creator mindset. The first thing has to do with setting expectation. This is from an event in Sweden called the Urban Burn Stockholm. When you buy a ticket, on the ticket it says, you are entitled to nothing. And what they mean by that is that with buying the ticket, all you get is access to the space, but that nothing will happen unless you co-create it. And I think that mindset is so different how then we show up to most of our places. And think back how you showed up here a couple days ago at the eShip Summit. Did you show up as a consumer? Did you show up as a co-creator? And why is that? Why did you show up the way you showed up? And how could we maybe change it? The second thing has to do with commitment. There has to be something at stake. If there's nothing at stake, we can't do anything. This is an example from a community up in Canada called CEO, where every year they bring together 500 women activators that act with what they call radical generosity to support other female entrepreneurs. And what they do is that they have a commitment that each person puts in $1,100 a year that goes into a fund that is then loaned out at 0 interest to other female entrepreneurs. And try to show up in that community as a consumer. That creates a very different kind of sense of involvement if you have that kind of commitment in there. And a lot of communities talk about values, about the importance of values. And I think values are great. You saw the Holcim Manifesto. Values have been a big part of my life. But you know what's better than values? practices, turning these values into practices and commitments. And I think a lot of communities fall short of that. The next thing I want to look at as we move from consumer to co-creators, I want to look at control and power. Andy mentioned Wikipedia before. Wikipedia actually got started not as Wikipedia, but the early version of it was called Newpedia. Newpedia had the same idea: let's collect the world's knowledge and wisdom, put it online for free, but they had a different approach. So they looked in what they call here, joined this massive effort. They looked for scientists and scholars and invited them to contribute articles, and they would go through a 7-step process of peer review and to make sure that things were correct. And after 1 year, they had 27 articles. Now, Wikipedia has 45 million articles translated in a gazillion languages. And what's the difference? Well, the difference has to do with control and trust, because you see on the top right corner of every Wikipedia page, there's a little invitation that says edit. And yes, I tried last night to edit the history of Wikipedia page. You totally can. You don't even have to log in. And the principle there is, what if we trusted you? What if we trust every person in our ecosystem to do the right thing? What if we designed not for the bad actors and assuming that we have to control them, but what if we designed for the good people, the people who are well-intentioned? And what if we assumed that everyone had a gift to contribute? I think that's a big difference. And that's how we unlock mass collaboration, by assuming those gifts and to design from trust. We are so used to mistrust that we often design our groups actually from a sense of mistrust. When we talk about trust and control, I think it's very important to talk about power. And I think a lot about how power is distributed within a community and a group. And every group comes on a spectrum. And the spectrum I call is the centralized to decentralized to distributed. Centralized spectrum is all the power is in one hand. Most conferences work like that. There's an organization that puts it on and brings people together. There's definitely trust that happens there, but all the control is one place. There's the decentralized model where we have different examples here in the room, like Startup Weekend, 1 Million Cups, where there's a central node, but then enables smaller groups to create their own. And there's the distributed model. When you think of your neighborhood, when you think of your neighborhood, there is not one person that owns it. There's not one person that runs it. And I think if we want people to show up as co-creators, we need to make them co-owners. We need to share ownership with them. And too often, I think we do communities in a centralized way, where all the power is held by one person. But if you don't have any power, how are you going to feel like you're really a co-creator of this? And I personally seen that in my own community with Sandbox. We actually shifted from, we started as a big conference in a centralized model. We then went to decentralized model, where we enabled different hubs to create their own cities across the world. And over time, long story short, we ended up running out of money and we couldn't have an HQ anymore. And so people started taking on the initiative and they started running it themselves. So we're now a fully distributed model. And the question that it means for us as community builders are, what type of leadership does a distributed model need? It's not a top-down leadership. It's much more maybe a horizontal leadership. It's a leadership from within. It becomes much more about enabling and empowering people than telling them what to do. The last thing I want to look at today is, as we think about going from consumer to co-creator mindset, I think it's very important that we look at what kind of experiences we create. And in my work, I see that there is a misconception that we are trying to create experiences that are professional. And most experiences in a community space that I come across are over-engineered. Actually, we humans, we don't need that much. And if I had to choose one tool, one single tool, technology, physical, whatever, to build a community, I would choose a kitchen table. I think this is the most powerful community building tool that there is out there. Why? As Andy mentioned, Peter Block said that a community is the sum of all the conversations that happen. Well, where do we have the most important conversations? Where do we have the conversations that matter most? I think it's over food. I think it's while sharing in an informal setting. And it's really these like very simple, very cheap, very repeatable experiences that make a difference. And actually, you don't even need a table. I think the most important, if I had to kind of tell you what format to use, I would say do it potluck. Why? If you want people to co-create, then choose a format that is co-created. So do a dinner where everyone brings food and where everyone helps to clean up. And doing things the cheap, simple, informal way matters for two reasons. On the one hand, we connect so much more as humans in the familiar setting, in the home setting, than in the professional setting. We show up differently. So why don't we design our experiences in a much more human way? And the second thing why it matters is for consistency reasons, that a lot of groups, a lot of communities I see, they put on amazing experiences, but then you never hear from them for a couple months. And then all of a sudden they're back and they put on another experience. But groups and humans need consistency. We need rhythm. We need a heartbeat to build trust. The amazing thing about trust and belonging is that it has compounding value over time. But it needs consistency, it needs that rhythm to build over time. So if you build small and repeating experiences that everyone can co-create, you have a much higher chance of creating that heartbeat. And this brings me to today and this very room. Who in this room has ever attended a potluck? Who of you thinks they know how to organize a potluck dinner? Who of you thinks that in the next 2 months you could host a potluck? Well, what do you think, what would this community look like if we actually did that? What would this community look like if we actually had these conversations in small ways and we would keep going? What would your commitment look like? What would this community look like if you took a commitment today to organize a little potluck for your campfire? I want to leave you with this quote that for me really sums up the core of why I believe in the power of community. And then I want to leave you with, it's by Margaret Wheatley that has inspired me and I'm sure has inspired many of us on our journeys. And she says, the world doesn't change one person at a time. It changes as a network of relationships form among people who discover they share a common cause and vision of what's possible. This is good news for those of us intent on changing the world and creating a positive future. Rather than worry about critical mass, our work is to foster critical connection. Thank you very much.